What if the answer to a city's loneliness wasn't some grand gesture, but a simple packed lunch? Imagine if the cure for a silence born of trauma wasn't found in a clinic, but in the quiet friendship of a 6-year-old girl. This is a story about the profound and unexpected power of a single small act of kindness. It's a story about how a little girl named Emily, a silent boy named Ethan, and a shared meal sparked a movement of compassion that rippled through thousands of lives and changed the heart of their city. It's a story that reminds us that the most significant transformations often begin with the smallest gestures. And it all started in the noisy, colorful chaos of a first-grade classroom with a lunchbox. The Franklin Elementary School cafeteria was a universe of sound. Trays clattered, voices chattered, and 100 little dramas unfolded over milk cartons and sandwiches. And right in the middle of it all was Emily Harper, a little girl with bright, curious eyes and 2 pigtails that bounced when she talked. Emily was a born observer. She noticed things. The way sunlight made dust bunnies dance under the teacher's desk, the caterpillar inching across the playground fence, and the way her teacher's smile didn't always reach her eyes. And for 3 weeks, she had noticed the boy. He sat alone at the very end of the long blue table, a small island in a sea of kids. He never spoke. He never played during recess. His name, the teacher said, was Ethan. And at lunchtime, he would sit there, hands in his lap, his eyes fixed on the space on the table in front of him. He never had a lunchbox. He never got in line for hot lunch. He just sat, silent and still, as if he were waiting for something or someone that never came. The other children, as children often do, had mainly learned to look past him. He was a ghost at their feast, a silent presence they didn't know what to do with. But Emily couldn't look away. Her grandmother, Evelyn, a woman whose wisdom was as warm as the quilts she stitched, had always told her, "Em, the quietest people often have the loudest hearts. You have to learn how to listen to the silence." Emily didn't really know what that meant, but she understood the funny, tight feeling in her own chest when she looked at Ethan, like a shoelace pulled too snug. It was the feeling of seeing something that just wasn't right, and wanting more than anything to make it better. On a Tuesday, Emily's grandmother packed her favorite lunch, a turkey and cheese sandwich cut into a star, a bag of apple slices, 2 oatmeal raisin cookies, and a juice box. As Emily sat down, she looked across the cafeteria to the end of the blue table. There was Ethan, a lone silhouette against a bright mural of smiling animals. That tight feeling was back. She looked at her star-shaped sandwich. She looked at her 2 cookies. Then she looked at Ethan's empty hands. An idea, simple, popped into her 6-year-old mind. She picked up her lunchbox, marched right down the length of the table, and stopped in front of him. His eyes, usually looking down, flickered up to meet hers for a split second before darting away. He seemed to shrink into himself, like he was expecting to be teased. Emily didn't say a word. She just opened her lunchbox. She took out the foil-wrapped sandwich, broke it carefully in half, and placed one of the star points on the table in front of him. Then she took out the 2 cookies and put one right next to the sandwich. She sat on the bench beside him, not too close, but not far away either, and started eating her half of the sandwich. For a long moment, Ethan didn't move. He just stared at the food. Emily didn't push or prod. She just sat with him, sharing the silence. Her grandmother's words echoed in her head. Learn how to listen to the silence. Finally, slowly and hesitantly, his small hand reached out. His fingers brushed against the foil, and he picked up the sandwich. He took a tiny bite. Emily didn't cheer or even smile. She just kept eating her own lunch, giving him the space and the quiet permission just to be. For the first time in weeks, Ethan Carter ate lunch. This became their routine. Every day, Emily would sit with Ethan and divide her lunch into 2 equal portions. She never asked him why he didn't have food. She never asked why he didn't talk. Sometimes she'd hum a little tune. Sometimes she'd tell him about her weekend, or the book her grandmother was reading to her, or the wobbly tooth in the back of her mouth. She talked enough for both of them, filling the space not with pressure, but with a gentle presence. She had no idea that this small act of sharing a meal was doing more than filling an empty stomach. It was a lifeline. It was a message, delivered without words, that said, "I see you. You're not invisible. You matter. Their teacher, a kind man named Marcus Bennett, was the first to see the change. He'd been worried about Ethan. The boy had shown up at the school district's office a few weeks before, lost and unable to communicate. All attempts to find his family had failed. He was a mystery, a child locked in a fortress of silence. Mr. Bennett had tried everything to reach him, but the walls were just too high. But now, he saw a crack of light. He noticed that after lunch with Emily, Ethan's shoulders seemed a little less hunched. He'd sometimes watch the other kids on the playground, his eyes following a ball as it flew through the air. One afternoon in art class, Mr. Bennett saw Emily drawing a bright yellow sun. Next to her on his own paper, Ethan had drawn a small, shaky yellow circle. It was a start. It was a connection, forged not with words, but with a shared sandwich and the unwavering empathy of a 6-year-old girl. While Emily and Ethan were building their quiet friendship, a different story was unfolding across the city. A tale of frantic desperation. David Carter, a tech billionaire whose name was synonymous with success, was living a nightmare. His face, usually on the cover of business magazines, was now etched with anxiety. His son, his only child, Ethan, was gone. David Carter was a man who could solve the most complex problems and command the attention of world leaders. But he couldn't find his son. Tragedy had struck 6 months earlier. Ethan's mother, an artist with a laugh that could fill any room with light, had died in a sudden car accident. The event shattered their world. For David, the grief hollowed him out. But for 6-year-old Ethan, the trauma was absolute. The world became a terrifying, unpredictable place. And so he stopped speaking. Not one word. Doctors called it selective mutism, a severe response to trauma. His voice was locked away, and no one had the key. David, a man used to finding solutions, threw all his resources at the problem. He hired the best therapists and renowned child psychologists. Their sprawling modern home, which overlooked the city, became a sterile environment of clinical observation. But nothing worked. Ethan remained a ghost in his own life, his presence a constant, heartbreaking reminder of their shared loss. One afternoon, during a visit to the park, the unthinkable happened. David was distracted for just a moment he would replay in his mind 1,000,000 times, and when he turned back, Ethan was gone. Panic set in, cold and sharp. Ethan had wandered away, disappearing into the vast, anonymous city. The search was immediate and massive. David Carter used every ounce of his influence and fortune. Private investigators, police task forces, public appeals, but the small, silent boy had vanished. He was eventually found by a police officer, scared and unable to say his own name. With no ID and no means of communication, the authorities were at a loss. He was clean and well-fed, showing no signs of abuse, just a profound, unbreakable silence. He was entered into the system as an unidentified child, and through a series of bureaucratic handoffs, was temporarily enrolled at Franklin Elementary. At the same time, social services attempted to unravel the mystery of who he was. So as David Carter's world shrank to the single, agonizing goal of finding his son, Ethan's world was slowly beginning to expand. And it was all because another child decided he looked lonely and offered him half a sandwich. To Emily Harper, he wasn't a mystery case. He was a friend. The change in Ethan, though small, continued to grow. It was like watching a frozen river begin to thaw. The cracks were tiny at first, but they were there. He started making eye contact with Emily for longer. He sat a little closer during story time. And in art class, his drawings began to change. One rainy Thursday, Mr. Bennett gave the class a prompt. Draw your favorite place. The room filled with the scratching of crayons on paper as kids drew bedrooms, playgrounds, and grandparents' houses. Emily pulled her grandmother's garden, full of oversized red tomatoes and smiling sunflowers. She glanced over at Ethan. He was hunched over his paper, his crayon held tight in his fist, drawing with an intensity Mr. Bennett had never seen from him before. When the time was up, Mr. Bennett walked around the room. When he got to Ethan's desk, he stopped. On the paper was a drawing. It was messy and the lines were uncertain, like any 6-year-old's drawing. But it was also incredibly detailed. It showed a room with a huge window, and through that window, a city skyline was visible. One building was taller than all the others, a gleaming silver spire. And in the room, next to the window, was a small figure with brown hair and a larger figure with a sad face. Floating above the larger figure's head, Ethan had drawn a single, unmistakable object. The sleek, futuristic logo of Carter Innovations, the company whose iconic tower dominated the city skyline. David Carter's Company. Mr. Bennett's heart hammered in his chest. He knelt beside Ethan's desk. "Ethan," he said softly, pointing to the logo. "What is this?" Ethan looked at the drawing, then up at his teacher. His lips parted. A slight, raspy sound came out, barely a whisper. "Daddy!" It was the first word he had spoken in months. Everything moved quickly after that. Mr. Bennett, with trembling hands, called the principal, who called the social services agency. They looked at the drawing, at the unmistakable logo, and at the single word Ethan had spoken. The pieces of the puzzle suddenly began to snap into place. The missing boy from the news, the son of the famous billionaire, had been here all along. The reunion was quiet and private, arranged in the principal's office after school. When David Carter walked in, he looked like a man who had aged a decade in just a few weeks. His eyes were hollow, his expensive suit rumpled. He scanned the room, his gaze frantic until it landed on the small boy in a chair, holding Emily Harper's hand. "Ethan?" David whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Ethan looked up. He saw his father, and his face, which had been a quiet mask for so long, began to crumble. A tear rolled down his cheek. He let go of Emily's hand, slid off the chair, and ran into his father's arms. David Carter fell to his knees, wrapping his son in a desperate hug, burying his face in the boy's hair. For the first time in a long, long time, Ethan felt safe. Emily stood by the principal's desk, watching. She didn't understand the whole story of the lost billionaire's son. She just saw a boy who had been sad, and a dad who had been unhappy, and now they were together. And in that moment, that's all that mattered. The silence was broken, not by doctors, but by patience, a shared lunch, and a simple drawing of a favorite place. The power of a single connection can be truly world-changing. If this story is touching your heart, consider subscribing to more content that celebrates the moments of kindness that transform our lives. Your support enables us to continue sharing these powerful stories. Now, back to the incredible ripple effect that was just getting started. In the days that followed, the story became a media sensation. Billionaire's lost son found in elementary school. The headlines were dramatic, but they all missed the real story. They focused on the wealth and the drama, but David Carter was focused on something else entirely. He was focused on the how. How had his son, who had been locked in traumatic silence, begun to heal? How did a public school with limited resources succeed where the world's top specialists had failed? He sat with Ethan in their sun-filled home, the tower of Carter Innovations visible through the window, just as his son had drawn it. Ethan was still quiet, but it was a peaceful quiet now, and every so often he'd speak a word or two. When David asked him about school, Ethan said a single name: Emily. David Carter had to understand. He arranged a meeting himself, not with a team of lawyers, but just him. He went back to Franklin Elementary and asked to speak with Emily Harper and her family. The meeting took place in the school library. On one side sat a billionaire. On the other side sat 6-year-old Emily, her grandmother Evelyn, and Mr. Bennett. David was direct. "I need to know what you did," he said, his voice full of honest curiosity. "I spent millions on the best doctors. We tried every therapy imaginable. Nothing worked. But my son came here and something changed." "What was the secret?" Evelyn Harper, her hands calmly folded in her lap, answered. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "There wasn't a secret. There was no therapy. There was just a little girl who saw a lonely boy and decided to be his friend." Emily, feeling brave next to her grandmother, spoke up. "He didn't have lunch," she said. "So I gave him some of mine." David Carter just stared at them. It was so simple, so profoundly simple, it was almost hard to grasp. His mind, accustomed to complex algorithms and multi-billion-dollar deals, struggled to process it. He had tried to fix his son, approaching his trauma like a broken piece of code that needed debugging. He surrounded him with experts who analyzed him. But Emily hadn't tried to fix Ethan. She had connected with him. She hadn't demanded he speak. She shared her silence. She hadn't seen a problem to be solved. She had seen a person to be with. Her kindness wasn't an intervention. It was an invitation back into the world. In that moment, in that humble school library, David Carter had an epiphany. All his wealth and power had been useless against his son's pain. The real healing came from a fundamental human need he had overlooked entirely, the need for connection. The antidote to his son's isolation wasn't a program. It was a person. The solution wasn't clinical. It was communal. A new idea began to form in his mind, a vision bigger than any tech venture he'd ever launched. He could build anything. What if he built something based on the simple principle Emily had shown him? A place dedicated to the power of human connection, where no one would ever have to feel as invisible as his son had. He looked at Emily, then at her grandmother, a pillar of quiet strength, and at Mr. Bennett, a teacher who saw far beyond any curriculum. He saw a team. He saw the future. "I want to build something," David said, his voice filled with a new purpose. "A foundation. A place for children like Ethan, for anyone who feels lost. A place built not on therapy, but on kindness, on connection. And I want you all to help me." The ripple that started with a shared lunch was about to become a wave. The Carter Foundation was born not in a boardroom, but in a school library, from a father's gratitude and a 6-year-old's simple act of grace. The announcement of the Carter Foundation sent a shockwave through the city. A $100 million pledge from David Carter was front-page news. The vision was huge, a state-of-the-art center to support vulnerable children and their families. It wouldn't be a clinic, but a community hub, with sensory-friendly quiet rooms, art and music studios, a teaching kitchen, and a massive community garden. A place that would model the simple magic that happened between Emily and Ethan. But a vision, even one backed by a billionaire, doesn't just happen. David Carter, a man accustomed to moving mountains in the corporate world, quickly discovered that changing the social landscape was a lot more complicated. The project immediately hit a wall of friction. First came skepticism. In the working-class neighborhood chosen for the center, residents were wary. They saw it as a billionaire's vanity project. At a tense town hall, one resident stood up and voiced the crowd's fear. "You're going to build this fancy glass building, and it's going to drive up our property taxes and push us out. This isn't for us. It's for you." Protesters gathered at the site, holding signs that read, "Community, not corporations." Then came the bureaucracy. The chosen site, a set of abandoned warehouses, was a zoning nightmare. Permits were denied. The city council debated about traffic and the strain on public services. Lawyers for local businesses filed injunctions. Every step forward was met with 2 steps back. The man who could launch a satellite with a few phone calls couldn't get a permit to break ground. Even his own team was a challenge. The experts David first hired wanted to structure the foundation in clinical ways, with intake protocols and diagnostic criteria. They tried to turn it back into the very thing that had failed Ethan. David grew frustrated. He was trying to build a monument to connection, and all he found were walls of disconnection, distrust, red tape, and rigid thinking. The turning point came during another heated city council meeting. The project was on the verge of being shelved. After a string of angry speeches, the council president, looking exhausted, asked if anyone else wanted to speak. From the back of the room, Evelyn Harper stood up and walked to the podium. Next to her, holding her hand, was Emily. The room went silent. Evelyn didn't talk about budgets or zoning laws. She spoke of loneliness. She spoke about her granddaughter and a quiet little boy who ate lunch by himself. "We are all so afraid," she said, her voice clear and steady. "We're afraid of change. We're afraid of people we don't know. We're afraid of getting it wrong. But the one thing we should be most afraid of is letting a child sit alone when we have the power to offer them a seat at the table." She looked down at Emily. My granddaughter isn't a planner or an expert, but she knows how to build a bridge. She did it with half a sandwich. All Mr. Carter is trying to do is build a bigger bridge for more children. Why are we making that so hard? Then, to everyone's surprise, Emily stepped up to the microphone. Her voice was small, but in the silent room, every word was crystal clear. "It's just about listening," she said. Ethan was quiet. But he wasn't empty. You just had to listen. Perhaps the neighborhood remains the same. You have to listen. Her words, in their profound simplicity, cut through all the anger and red tape. She didn't talk about the community as a problem to be managed. She spoke of listening to them. It reframed the entire debate. The mood in the room shifted. Council members looked at each other. The anger in the audience quieted into thoughtful contemplation. That night, the project was approved. And David Carter realized he had to stop trying to impose a solution and start co-creating one with the community. He needed to listen. The real work wasn't about bricks and mortar. It was about building trust, one conversation at a time. The construction of the Carter Foundation became a community project. Following the new philosophy of listening, David's team held open forums, inviting residents to share their ideas and concerns. The architectural plans were redrawn based on their feedback, transforming the design from a cold glass building into a warm, welcoming space that fit into the neighborhood. Local contractors were hired and residents were given priority for jobs. When the foundation finally opened 2 years later, it wasn't a monument to a billionaire, but a testament to a community's heart. The centerpiece wasn't a grand lobby, but a sprawling community garden managed by none other than Evelyn Harper. The foundation was everything David had envisioned and more. It had sensory retreats for kids who needed quiet, a music room where joy could be expressed through a drum beat instead of words, an art studio where kids could tell their stories in color, just as Ethan had. Mr. Bennett, now the foundation's director of education, started programs built on strengths, not deficits. He created an intergenerational mentorship program, where seniors like Evelyn would read to children, share their skills, and serve as a comforting presence, bridging the gap between generations. The impact on the city was gradual but profound. The foundation became a hub of life. Families who had felt isolated found a supportive community. The neighborhood's skepticism melted away, replaced by a fierce sense of ownership. The community garden became a spot where neighbors connected, breaking down social barriers over shared work and fresh vegetables. Success stories began to pour out. A nonverbal autistic teen who started volunteering in the music room and began communicating through song lyrics. A young girl with anxiety who found her confidence leading gardening workshops. The foundation's model of listening first began to influence the city's own social services. The city, once known for its fast pace and anonymous crowds, began to be known for something else, its compassion. It became a city that was learning to listen, and at the center of it all were the 2 children who started it. Ethan, now a vibrant and talkative 8-year-old, was thriving. He was still gentle and observant, but his silence was no longer born of trauma. He became one of the foundation's most excellent ambassadors, instinctively knowing how to sit with a new, shy child and make them feel seen. Emily Harper, though still just a girl, had found her voice as a young leader. She became a youth representative on the foundation's board, constantly reminding the adults of the simple principle on which the organization was built. Her journey showed that you are never too small to make a difference. The story of the lunchbox became a local legend, a modern parable told in schools and community centers. It was a reminder that the grandest transformations can grow from the smallest seeds, and that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is share your lunch. So, what's the takeaway from a story like this? It's a powerful illustration of the ripple effect. A single small act, sharing a sandwich, didn't just feed a hungry boy. In this story, it broke a traumatic silence, healed a family, and inspired a father to channel his resources into human connection. It overcame skepticism and red tape. Ultimately, it helped create a new heart for a city, a place built on the radical idea that listening is a form of love and that belonging is a fundamental human right. This story is a poignant reminder that we all have the power to start a ripple effect. We may not have a billionaire's resources, but each of us has a lunchbox, something we can share with others. It might be a moment of our time, a listening ear, or a simple act of inclusion. The characters show us that true strength lies in empathy, and the courage to connect is the most potent force for healing in the world. It's a story about creating change not from the top down, but from the heart out. The world is full of people sitting alone, waiting for someone to notice. The question this story leaves us with is a simple one. Who will you share your lunch with today? If this story moved you, please give this video a like and share it with someone who might need a reminder of the power of kindness. And we'd love to read your own experiences in the comments below. What's an act of kindness, big or small, that has stayed with you? Thank you for watching.